All right, welcome back. Let's get started. Today is 2/22/22. It's kind of fun. Interesting date. And again, we're in the start of a new month. Hopefully, February goes by a little bit faster than Mondays. January is definitely tough so far. So welcome back. I want to use just a quick recap of last class, since I know there were a few folks that weren't able to make it. And last class, we covered some pretty important ground, including the next major writing assignment for the class, the small group assessment. That's pretty important. And again, it's coming up on the 13th. So I just want to do a quick recap there. We also used Monday's class to talk about decision making. This week is about the ways that groups work together to reach decisions on crucial issues, as well as to solve problems by working together. So we'll be talking a lot today about the ways that we use group problem solving through things like brainstorming, and the ways that we can create solutions to issues that oftentimes we're not able to reach if we're just working alone or just working with somebody else. And then we also talked about some of the ways that people are able to reach a decision, the different manners and strategies of decision making that tend to come. So as a reminder, the small group assessment is due on February 13th. So that, again, was about 2 weeks from Monday. So that is coming up, and it's similar in length to your first writing assignment for the class. The small group assessment is about 2 pages, and again, it has the prompt with rubric and guidelines available on Canvas. Rather than ask you to look at a group that you're a member or part of, right, I'm asking you to think about your participation in the small group activities that we've done in class, either face-to-face or through Zoom, right? We've had a number of them, such as the activity in the first day of class, where we were trying to find things that we share in common. The activity where we were asking you to think about Luis joining the hiking club and trying to acclimate to the culture and background of the group. Talk about creating a listenable environment, or something like preparing for an interview. We had the survival activity, where we were trying to prepare that type of environment. We have the small business activity, where your group that's trying to attract employees from a lot of different cultural backgrounds and identities. And we're going to have another activity and scenario today that applies those group skills too. So you're welcome to draw from them, even if you're not present at all the classes, right? You've probably attended at least 2 or 3 of those major small group activities that you can use to help with completing this assignment. Again, I recommend using that rubric and Canvas available, and rubric and guidelines available on Canvas under week 6 that will help you with completing and catching up on this assignment. And then remember, right, that this assignment draws from a lot of the group activities that we've been completing so far in the class. I wanted to make a mention as well that today is officially a week since the due date for the first writing assignment, right? So if you haven't already turned in the first writing assignment for the class, which was asking you to reflect on your membership in a small group, You can turn it in by the end of the day if you choose to use your get out of jail free card with no penalty. So just let me know, send that assignment by the end of the day. Let me know you want to use your card and you can do so. If you haven't turned it in and you don't intend to use your card, just remember that that is -5% for each day the assignment is late, right? So by this point, it would be -35% to the overall grade. I mention that because I have had a number of folks who haven't turned in the previous writing assignment and haven't communicated to me whether or not they intend to use the card. So just let me know if you're intending to use it or not, if you haven't already turned in the assignment. So just wanted to let you know that that stuff is coming up. And we also had, again, that assignment last week. I'm assuming that I should be getting most, if not all, of the remaining essays by the end of the day today, which means I'll be able to return feedback to you by the end of the day Friday. So look forward to that. I like to use feedback on those earlier assignments to help you prepare, to know what went well and what to work on as you work on your next paper, right? So when you see that feedback, rather than throwing it away or not looking at it, right, you can directly use that to help you to prepare for the next assignment. Last class, we talked about the way that group problem solving requires 7 major steps, right? The idea being that when our group is trying to work on solving a problem, we go through these steps to reach the solution and to figure out a way to constructively move forward that differs from just working on your own, right? For instance, last class, we brought up the idea of somebody working for the philosophy club and putting on a symposium or public event to share ideas and thoughts in philosophy. We talked about how you not only have to deal with the problem, right, but this third step of establishing criteria means considering what does it mean to succeed or do well in this activity, and then the ways that we can implement a solution or resolution to that issue. We also had you all break up and talk about some of the different ways that we reach and arrive at solutions as a group. Can flop means that we don't make a solution, we kick the can down the road. We might delegate to somebody that has expertise or knowledge that we don't on the topic. We can average, right? We compromise, meeting in the middle, and reaching a solution that works for everybody, even though it's not everybody's favorite, such as something like holding a hybrid event. We talked about how voting, right, does not necessarily have to be a majority decision. In some situations, if there's a really big need for larger support, you can make it a 2/3 vote in order to get that critical mass and a plurality, right, where there might be multiple options and the option that gets the most support does not necessarily get a majority. One key idea here that we mentioned is the idea that consensus does not mean that everybody agrees or truly believes in the thing that you all decide on, right? If you decide to host it as a hybrid event, you say, okay, I'll support it as a hybrid event. You might really want it to be face-to-face, but you're willing to sign on to it as hybrid because other people are doing it, right? Groupthink matters when we're thinking about how people work together as a group. So we went into those ideas. And for this class, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the different ways that decision-making happens as it relates to power, some of the ways that we use brainstorming. And then we'll be doing an activity that applies skills in group decision-making and brainstorming as well. Last class, I previewed the idea of the Tannenbaum-Schmidt continuum, right? And this is the idea that when you're a part of a group in your life, that it runs from a spectrum of much more autocratic form to a participatory form, right? The way that group members work together. For instance, if you're part of an extracurricular or athletic event on campus, and your coach is the one that makes the calls, for instance, if they cancel the competition or event that you were a part of, right, that would be a very autocratic form of engagement. But if you're a part of a group and you all collectively decide as a team that you do want to go to this competition that's held in Salem, right, you could choose to do so using that participative approach as well. So on the far end, right, in a very autocratic, you have the idea that a manager or team leader is just going to make a decision and announce it, right? It has been decided that we will not meet next week. And that, of course, is very authoritative, doesn't really have any input from other group members, right? It's just the leader saying, this is how it is, my way or the highway, right? And that can sometimes be useful if you find yourself in a leadership position and you do have to take personal action, right? If you have, for instance, if you're a coach or team captain and you discover that a member of the group has been secretly supporting another team, right? You would probably announce that they're no longer on the team. Managers selling the decision is another element that's pretty autocratic, but it's a little bit different, right? Is somebody saying, look, I'm the team leader, group leader on this activity, and this is the decision that's being made. Here's why I made that decision. Here's why you should agree with it, right? If you're a leader of a group, one of the challenges to group cohesion is that if you make this executive unilateral decision, you're probably going to get some pushback. Not everybody is going to agree with or support the reasons behind what you do. So in order to foster the cohesion and overall harmony of the group, you might try to sell and justify the reason that that decision is being made. You might say, look, I know that we really enjoyed this member of the team, but the idea of them secretly supporting another team from another school really affects our trust and confidence in that person. So while we really like them, right, that's something that we can't really forgive, and we needed to make this decision to support the group overall. I would do this with anybody. And then the manager presenting ideas and inviting questions, again, still pretty autocratic, but it does allow there to be some kind of input, right? That somebody says, hey, you know, this person has left the team. We've made the decision to move forward without them. However, right, if there's an option for us to have them re-added to the team, maybe after they take like a probationary period, or you know, you have questions about the reason that they left the team, I'm happy to talk about it and address this further. Again, still autocratic in the decision itself, but more open in exploring ideas or things to do in the longer term. A democratic approach, right, is sort of in the middle. There's still some level of leadership, right, or oversight that a manager or group leader does, but they are really allowing the idea itself to take form based on feedback. So through a democratic form, right, might be tentative options. We're thinking about removing this person from the team. You know, it's on the table, it's on the docket. Let's talk about this and what we can do maybe to create best solution together. Another idea, right, is that the manager, even more democratic, does not necessarily propose the action, but says, there's this issue. They have the ability to set the agenda, right, or to identify the problem or the item to work on, but they allow people to really work together on what to do. For instance, you might say, we have a problem. This member of the team has been secretly supporting and coaching and helping out a team from another school. We need to talk together about how we're going to address this issue, right? And then in the most participative approach possible, the manager, right, allows members of the group that are not the group leader to function and basically reach a decision with pretty minimal involvement. In other words, right, manager says, hey, there's this issue with the person. I will let you all make a decision, and let's arrive at a conclusion together. So using this continuum, right, you see, depending on the group, the role of power really shifts and impacts group participation as a whole, right? You can have the benefit of a group leader being strong and making the decision that they want, but the consequence of people in the group not feeling like their voice or perspective is being heard. Whereas on the other end, right, you could allow for a lot of participation or involvement without that direct leadership, but you could end up reaching a decision in a group that you don't like. So it's important for you to think about what's appropriate for the context or the situation, given this continuum of power and the ways that it impacts how group members work together. So another idea that I think is a good one for us to think about as we're working together in groups is the idea of bisociation. And that's the idea, you can kind of think about it as different parts of a chain linking together. That the idea here is that a bunch of ideas or concepts or ways to resolve a solution end up coming together and creating something that's interesting or new, right? Oftentimes, people like to say the phrase, oh, I'm just spitballing, or I'm just presenting ideas, or just putting thoughts out there, right? Putting things on the table. And one of the really interesting and useful things about how group members work, right, is the transition from working together as a group to create ideas, to putting those ideas into practice in a way that's interesting. Again, we talked last class about the example of putting together a philosophy symposium, putting together ideas, for instance, about a guest speaker, about a building to house it in, about maybe like a musical accompaniment at certain points, like an intermission, right? Or things like that could ultimately come together and make for really interesting and well-developed ideas. We think about the role that things like culture and identity play in that process, right? The more perspective and experiences that we bring to the table, the more new ideas that we have that can ultimately merge together and create something that goes beyond what we could come up with on our own. Kind of a funny example, right? So here's a comic, right, where somebody is digging a hole with a spoon, right? The other person says, hey, you want a shovel? And they say, no, I'm already using a spoon. I'm happy to use a spoon. Obviously, it's a lot better for the person to be using a shovel. It's a lot more efficient, saves a lot of time and energy, and it would be a much better option. But because the person says, hey, I'm already using the spoon, right? They're comfortable with what they have or how things are right now. They're not willing to change. That's a good way of thinking about the status quo. Status quo is a Latin root word, which means keeping things as they are, making no major changes, or not changing course. So status quo, right, is really connected to what you might think about in things like science as the idea of inertia. How many folks are familiar with or have heard about this idea of inertia? Objects at rest stay at rest. Objects in motion tend to stay in motion, right? That is, if things are currently happening in a group, for instance, maybe you're a part of, you just joined the staff working for a restaurant, right? You currently have a schedule, slotted times, ways that your restaurant manages and works together, right? A lot of the group members are going to say this works, this method of organization is just fine, we don't need to change it. And if you say, I think we should change the schedule, or I think we should change our menu, the immediate question you're going to get from other people working at your restaurant is, why? What is the reason for doing this? Why would we make this change? Why is that change worth it? And we as humans are driven toward the status quo, right? You can think about your routine. What are the things that you like to eat? What are the clothes that you like to wear? What are the activities you like to do? And chances are you have a pretty familiar pattern. Maybe you try new things here and there, but you stick to what works, right? Changing the status quo or altering the way a group behaves is a challenge for a lot of reasons. One of them being that when you're in a group, it takes a significant amount of work and labor to move away from where things are, like creating an entirely new menu at a restaurant. It also means when you're moving away from the status quo that it could backfire, right? Or it could be worse. We also feel like if we need to change things from how they are, that there needs to be a reason or justification for the change. That changing the menu means that we could get more customers or we could save prices and save on costs. That is a really important consideration. What do we get out of this change? There's a book that came out and is probably one of the most popular books in sort of like the business and corporate world surrounding corporate culture and identity, right? And the book's called Who Moved My Cheese? It's a book about how basically you have two humans and two rats in a maze, right? And the idea is that they always know that there's a specific route to get the cheese in the maze, right? And every time they do the maze, they get that cheese. But the location of the cheese changes. It's in a different part of the maze. And the way the humans approach it and say, hey, it's not in the spot it should be, what do we do? The way that the rats do it, where they say, okay, it's a different spot, and try to find a way to that spot, deals with the idea of adaptability, right? So it's a story that is used in a lot of business and corporate contexts that say, we need to adapt to changing circumstances, that the cheese is not going to be in the same place in the maze every time. We're not going to do the exact same route every time. Sometimes we have to change our approach and perspective in order to solve different issues and topics that come up, right? We've seen this a lot in the context of COVID-19, where the past 2 years have been radical shifts the way that a lot of groups and companies, organizations have behaved. Some have been able to adapt really well to these changes, others not so much, right? And the idea of adaptability is an important consideration for how groups respond to changing conditions. Knowing as well that we as humans are often biased toward the status quo or inertial. A neophile, right, is a type of person that is very interested in pursuing new ideas and options. That is, they're the type of people that see a new idea or way to do something and they say, oh, shiny, I'm going to take on this new approach. This can be really useful because it means that group members are definitely highly adaptive. But one problem, right, is that it means that people in groups don't necessarily stick to an idea or really let an idea evolve, right? If you're constantly adapting or changing and you don't allow an idea to develop or grow, right? If your menu at your restaurant changes every month, your customers are going to be frustrated. They're not going to know what to expect. Whereas a neophobe is somebody that generally opposes or dislikes new ideas, right? For instance, maybe you're proposing a new idea, you and your coworkers are working together, and your boss just says no, right? This is something we think about maybe developmentally growing up, right? Oftentimes, as kids, we were told no without an explanation, right? That's an example of a neophobe approach where there's an opposition to new ideas, not because of the merit of those ideas, but just out of a desire to keep things how they are, right? This connects pretty closely to the role of culture and the way we think about how culture oftentimes reinforces doing something for the sake of tradition or doing something because it's been done the same way in the past. Oh, we always take this road to travel to this competition, even though there might be another road that's safer or more efficient. So there's an analogy that the book brings up that I think is a useful way of thinking about the brainstorming process, right? They use an example of ostriches and sea urchins, which I thought was kind of interesting, right? An ostrich, of course, does not lay a whole lot of eggs, but they have these massive eggs that they spend a lot of time and effort incubating, right? And each egg is super important to the health and the well-being of the ostrich. You can also think about, for instance, elephants, right? Elephants are mammals who give birth to live young, but they have a very long pregnancy and gestation period for just one elephant, right? That's sort of on one end of the extreme, whereas other creatures, such as sea urchins, will literally spread millions of eggs, the vast majority of which would die very early, right? But then you have those very small amount of eggs that do end up becoming full-blown sea urchins, right? And that example, I think, is a good way of thinking about brainstorming. Some people are very conditioned to have a couple ideas that they really develop and really focus on closely, but other people are more like sea urchins, where they just put together a lot of different ideas. And as a result of that, not all the ideas land, but maybe there's an idea or two that works. Brainstorming tends to be more of a sea urchin approach, right? Where people just pose a lot of ideas, and you never know what sticks. In fact, we get so worried at times about the quality of our ideas that oftentimes we don't present them. And so brainstorming is not necessarily about quality, it just means putting those ideas out there such that there might be an unexpected solution to the issue. So brainstorming is really something we've heard about, I'm sure, in a lot of different classes, something that's been mentioned in this class. But what brainstorming really means, right, is just taking the time to let your imagination run wild, to think about and put together as many ideas. And that can be pretty easy to do individually. Maybe you're writing a paper and trying to decide on a topic, right? And you're just taking notes for yourself about what you could write about. That's pretty easy to do because it's just notes that you're taking for yourself. Nobody else is going to see them. But when we find ourselves in a group, we're a lot more worried about judgment, about what other people in the group will think. We don't want to ask a stupid question or present an idea that gets laughed at, right? That's a really big challenge of group participation, is allowing a space in which people can freely share ideas, even if those ideas don't land. And also creating a space where it's okay that your idea or an idea you hear doesn't really seem like a good one. In fact, shooting down ideas that don't work for the situation is a way to reaffirm the goals of the group. For instance, if you're trying to figure out what to do about the member of the team that cheated and supported the other team, right? You might think about, well, we can't just let them travel to the next competition with no consequence because we really value the honesty and cohesion of the group, right? Rejecting an idea reaffirms the values of that group. So again, when we brainstorm, we have to create a space in which people can openly share ideas, even if they don't end up working. Because we can find unexpected solutions that do work, we can also understand the group better and what's important to that group based on what we decide to do. I'll give you an example, right? So Pixar, which you might know, of course, as creator of a lot of really interesting and really creative films. For instance, you know, Toy Story, Up, WALL-E, and so on, right? They've made a lot of films that are incredibly out of the box and really interesting ideas, right? A movie that starts completely silent with a robot in this like dystopian wasteland is not something that I think is easy to come up with. So one thing that I think is really interesting is thinking about how companies and small groups like Pixar actually engage in the creative process and utilize brainstorming. So one example is that some of the founders of Pixar actually started by creating a lot of their ideas for their films just by sitting as a group and having lunch. And they just started to share all sorts of interesting and thoughtful things that eventually led to some really successful movies. But I have a quote here that actually is a book from a book that looks at Pixar's creative process. And it says the director, right, and the leaders at Pixar don't necessarily come up with an idea just on their own. Rather, every single member of the 200 to 250 person production group makes suggestions. That creativity is happening among hundreds and hundreds of people, right? And that's crucial. There are so many ideas and perspectives that are being brought to the table. Therefore, leaders of Pixar sort through those ideas. They figure it out in a way that could create a good or compelling story that gets compared to something like an archaeological dig, right? Where there's so much you can dig through and try to find, and you're looking for that diamond, right? I think that's a really good way of thinking about creativity and the creative process, and also in thinking about the continuum we just brought up earlier and the role that leadership plays. That creativity allows us to have a lot of perspectives of group members and make people openly feel like they can participate, but also that the leader or manager of the group might be somebody that occupies a unique role in figuring out which of those ideas is worth running. As a leader, right, oftentimes we find ourselves forced to make decisions and judgment calls on what we need to do to solve the problem and how to sort through that information, right? We have people that we count on to do that kind of work. But those ideas are an important step in getting. It's also worth thinking about some of the ways that brainstorming can be hurt by dynamics of groups. As I mentioned before, brainstorming and working together in groups is different than doing so independently because of the dynamics and relationships and some of the fears that we have about things like judgment. One idea here is the idea of blocking, that oftentimes people will lose a desire to speak or share an idea simply on the basis of somebody else in the group talking. For instance, maybe you come in, you have 10 different ideas of how you can redesign your restaurant or create a new menu. And you're talking about it, and you have somebody else who says, you know what, I think it's good for us to keep the menu as it is, here's why. It takes the wind out of your sails a little bit. It makes you less excited or interested in sharing your own ideas because somebody else is talking, or you might have much more difficulty getting a word in edgewise. Again, because in small groups, there's less opportunity for each person in that group to speak, there's less opportunity for people to share their ideas or to feel like their ideas make sense or are appropriate to the situation. So one problem there is, again, that idea of blocking. And we're motivated by how other people think about or engage with ideas. We have somebody, like a boss in our group, who's been shooting down ideas from other group members left and right. Maybe because of that, you had a bunch of ideas, but you choose not to share them because you think they're going to get shot down or rejected as well. Another key idea here is this idea of social matching. That is, if you're group members, if you're looking around the room and everybody else is low energy, doesn't seem very engaged in the topic or issue, we're more likely to mirror or match that energy level of the group. We like to fit in, and so we're going to not be the person that stands out and is way more energetic and enthusiastic compared to other group members. That can also be a reason that if members of the group are not necessarily sharing or bringing ideas to the table, that we're less likely to do so ourselves. And then lastly, another key idea is what's referred to as the illusion of group productivity. That we think, oh, wow, our group is brainstorming and coming up with ideas, right? But oftentimes we tend to assert or assess that the group is doing more or accomplishing more than it actually is. And again, a big problem here, as we mentioned last class, is that while there's a lot of brainstorming opportunities to come up, the challenge is translating those into an actual plan or a way to address the problem. That brainstorming alone does not get us to a solution to the problem, because we do have to make those decisions on which of those options we would ultimately pursue. So these are important considerations for you to think about as you're working together to come up with ideas on how to solve a problem or deal with an issue in a group. So what I'm going to have us do now is I have another scenario, and what I'm going to do is not ask you to write or type this for attendance for today. I'm going to have you come back and working on a different prompt on your own. But Madeline has her 5th birthday in 2 weeks. How exciting. She's currently living in Lausanne. Her parents have tasked you and your group with helping to prepare a birthday party. So you all are now party planners. Congratulations. You also know that Madeline is a big fan of reading, basketball, and Disney films. What I want you to do is to take some time with your group to brainstorm as many ideas as possible on how to host Madeline's party. What are you going to do? What is Madeline's party going to look like? Don't worry about the quality of those ideas, right? As we've talked about in the brainstorming process, the quality of those ideas is not a big deal. You can take some notes about ideas, but you don't need to turn in these ideas for attendance. And then once your group has finished coming up with and sharing ideas, I'd like your group to work together to arrive at a decision on how you're going to have Madeline host the party. So let's go ahead and do, we've got 3, 4, 5. Cool. So let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And then we'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we'll have 2 groups of 6, and then we'll have everybody on Zoom together as a group. So take some time to brainstorm, come up with ideas on this party.
Hello. How's very wonderful. All right, big idea. She likes princesses or she likes basketball. You're one of the princess basketball. I've seen those things, little, tight ones.
Yeah.
Princess or something come out. I dress up as a princess.
Even basketball.
Play a little basketball game and watch for that, or like Cinderella talking on see that.
If I like princesses, that'd be cool.
Yeah, or like hire those like Harley or Trotter.
It's like reading.
Really? Everybody sees. Wait, what is she doing like that?
This party's going out in the yard.
Everybody sees, all right.
Is she a fan of basketball, like the sport, like just playing it, or is she a fan of like the NBA and stuff?
So that's all the information you have, right? So you might figure out a decision.
I'm gonna say her dad's probably a big NBA guy, which kind of influenced her basketball. Just to make the dad a little happy, if she'll think it's cool, we'll get like, I don't know, Damian Lillard there or something. Her dad would be like, "Oh, this is so-" Yeah, Damian Lillard.
Yeah.
Look up his dad, it's all about it. Look at the Irish.
Maybe, maybe they play against each other.
What is she working for?
Like, possibly play against each other, like, basketball.
Dave versus.
Yeah, yeah, but it's- Maybe she's
Hey, that'd be a point of life.
mom and dad.
Yeah.
But she is, she's probably.
Yeah.
Dude, my mom read me started when I was 5. I don't really
But it's good that your mom was able to read you, because if you open up, there, would you be able to read it?
Not Narnia. I don't really like.
When I was 5, I really liked Doctor Who, right? Everybody not Doctor Who.
Okay, but she reads them, so.
She
Books for her birthday.
Yeah.
But I think, even somebody tomorrow. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a good idea.
Well, she sounds smart, just really, but it's a good I don't know whether yeah.
I've never watched it, a basketball.
It's bad, but it's also
It's okay. Based off of the book. Or like one of those Disney short story books, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. Really thick.
What's that one book?
Oh, yeah. Or something like that. But I'll do 13.
Yeah. I miss my childhood about
13's birthday.
stuff. Because they're going to school and they have like Dr. Seuss Day. They get their green eggs and ham.
Or guys, you have to raise your kid. Sorry, I was trying to.
Oh, yeah.
So do you want to do a book? Yeah.
Yeah. Get her every book, like every whole spectrum.
Okay. Or anyone want
A
to
book
do
of how to read basketball and just.
Oh.
Okay, and then it's Airbud theme.
Yeah.
Obviously. So the migration, are you on Disney or
Disney and
So.
That's why you get that's why you get that's why you
Yeah.
get the Disney princess basketball. If she's 5, I don't only do those like little quick ones. And I've seen like
Are you
princess.
with kids?
basketball,
It's just, she doesn't look
I
right.
just feel like a sleepover.
We take it to California.
And it was a sleepover. And it was a sleepover. There you go.
And then they'll watch high school.
That's what I'm thinking
And
too.
then they watch all three high school musicals. and basketball.
Is that appropriate? Disney.
One of the
Basketball.
princess.
I did high school, all three high school musicals.
Go. Lover, that's not bad.
Never play basketball game a while. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Just step it up a bit. Oh, and
Look at the Irish. Oh, yeah,
princess
you can
Hey,
Oh, God.
for Disney films. We never, why are we stuck on this princess story? We get the Toe Mater, or we know, is that Pixar? Cars, the cars.
They'll fall asleep in like.
So it's like Marvel, they have like a spectrum, like in this situation. But to make names not, but maybe.
The cutlery, the plates and things are gonna be just the princesses.
Why did we ship this?
it sounds like a lot of ideas are coming together. You might have somebody in your group who's ready to share what you all have worked on together. Just a couple minutes.
I could share.
Maybe I'll wait a second. How much more time do we have?
I'll give you like 2 or 3 more minutes.
I just want to make like, to make it. Where are we getting Mickey Mouse from? Disney. The Disney parks have like hidden Mickeys all over the place. That's true. Something like that.
There's hidden Mickeys in Kingdom Hearts 3 too. It's kind of fun. You play the game and like there's like ways you can find the hidden Mickey Mouse like symbol. You can take a photo. Just saying, Disney related. Good idea.
But where does it say Kingdom Hearts?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. It's like weirdly adjacent. You're right.
So Disney plays that.
Oh, those are grand. Quick trip to Disneyland.
That's the thing, there's last thing, they don't pay.
Yeah.
And then there's we have to sleep over at the doctor's.
Yeah. Disney basketball. Okay. Disney basketball.
We're gonna be like, you guys, you want to watch it? We'll watch it. Hold on. Hold on, watch it. Calm down. Okay. Just immediately. You can't sit the 5-year-old down. This is
Madeline.
Whoa.
Madeline. Maddie for short. About Lynn.
All right.
Avengers, where is? Is it? What part of California? Anaheim. How far is Anaheim?
It's on the other side of the state.
Is it really?
Cupertino,
Cupertino's northern.
Anaheim's down.
Is it close to like,
Cupertino, Bay Area,
oh,
I-5,
I've never really
SoCal.
gone to, work.
Just say Cupertino.
All right, so we had some fun kind of brainstorming and thinking about Madeline's party. So I want to start by hearing from the folks on Zoom. What was the idea that you all came up with? What was the decision that you all had on how to host the party?
So we kind of decided to host it maybe on like a basketball court, and have like some activities and stations set up. We decided that party favors could be books, maybe like Madeline's favorite book or something like that. We thought maybe if we had like a projector in the background or something, we could be playing Air Bud or High School Musical or some sort of like basketball Disney film.
Yeah.
One of the activities we thought of was having like little Disney princess basketballs, and like they could play with a mini hoop or something. We also thought that maybe a read aloud of Madeline's favorite book by either like a parent or somebody or like a local basketball player. And we decided for food, it could be like finger foods and maybe basketball or Disney princess themed or just Disney themed cupcakes.
That's awesome. I love all of the different ideas you all put together for party favors, for food, for all sorts of different little parts of the party to make it a fun experience. That's really cool. Also kind of interesting that Air Bud came up in this Zoom group too. Tells me a lot about childhood. I played it. I saw a couple of movies too. How about this group on this side? What did you all come up with together?
We got some ideas.
All right.
Okay, first off, we're gonna mix basketball and Disney, okay? We got a princess basketball hoop. She's 5, so she's still shooting on those little hoops, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
And I've definitely seen at Walmart the princess little basketball hoops. Okay, we're gonna have a princess come, okay? And we're also gonna have Damian Lillard there because she's a basketball fan. Okay. And they're gonna play some basketball. Damian Lillard's gonna dunk on a little girl. And then afterwards, the princess is gonna read a book to the kids. And then another idea we had was that instead of bringing like cards or something,
Yeah.
they're gonna each kid with like each person that's coming will bring a book.
Okay. Yeah.
The Space Jam cake.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's great. I love it. Again, I love all of the thought and enthusiasm that goes the different parts of this. Probably have somebody that's like tasked with the airport pickup or something like that for your test, but that's great. How about this group here on this side?
Okay, so we start off with, every kid is gonna be given a book when they come to the door. So just a little tiny book. And then our cake is gonna be based on her favorite book at the time.
Okay.
And so we'll have. Oh, Airbud, it's Airbud theme. I forgot about that. Airbud theme, I was not doing my activist remix.
Oh, you're just fine.
We were doing Airbud themed, and then the plates and stuff gonna be just princess themed with a sleepover at the end, watching Disney basketball.
Awesome. I love the way that like you can just see the different ideas that people are bringing to the table just get stacked on each other. Like, oh, we're gonna have a sleepover. Oh, we're gonna have these cupcakes. So we're also gonna have an Airbud. Like, that's awesome, right? And it's a thing that we do. We're working together that we don't get to do on our own in the same way. So what I want you to do then, in the last few minutes we have, right, is just to reflect on this experience. So you can write or type this, and it doesn't need to be super long, but just in the remaining minutes we have, what went well as you all were brainstorming and working together? What didn't go so well? Like, did these factors, weakening factors, brainstorming impact your group? And then how do you feel about the way that your group reached a decision? Oh, consensus can be a good thing, right? based on the zipping and laptop closing. Sounds like most of you all are about wrapped up. So just to recap for today, talked a little bit about brainstorming, the ways that it lets us work together, right? The way that it allows us to openly think about and share new thoughts, and the ways that, you know, it can be limited by those things like blocking and errors. I really enjoyed you all's enthusiasm and ideas and participation and engagement. Thought this was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed what you all brought to the table. It's like a low-key, kind of heartwarming moment to see you all do this planning and preparation. I'm sure Madeline would have a great experience. So on Friday, we'll be meeting up again to talk a little bit more about how to facilitate a good environment for groups working together. Go ahead and email or pass forward your attendance for today. Have an awesome rest of your Wednesday, and I'll see you again on Friday.